Hi, this is Bill Behrens, Agent of the Stars, and you're listening to the ECWF podcast.
Get the F out.
Alright, welcome to episode number 36 of the ECWF podcast. We will not get the F out, we put the F back in. I'm your host, Sean Bicking, coming to you from the Electric City, Scranton, Pennsylvania. On this episode, my guest was Bill Behrens, super agent. We talk UFC from last night, his career in television, working for the USWA, Music City Wrestling, NWA Wildside, WCW, WWE, TNA. And obviously his success as a booking agent for people like AJ Styles, Ricochet, Drew Galloway, Chris Sabin, all the big names, who's who. It's a real behind-the-scenes look at all the major companies out there and a history lesson at the same time. So, enjoy. Back on the podcast here with Bill Behrens, super agent, TV producer, superstar, everything. I mean, he wears so many different hats in the wrestling world and just in the TV world in general. Bill, welcome to the ECWF podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here, and thank you for all the superlatives.
Yeah.
Everyone likes to be complimented, and then hopefully you justify some of it.
Yeah, definitely. Before we get started with your career and your background and stuff like that, did you get a chance to watch UFC last night?
No, I didn't. I mean, I was pleased or interested to find out what the outcome was of the Brock Lesnar fight. Because honestly, anytime he goes into a fight, you just assume that he's like a gorilla and everybody's just going to die. But it doesn't always go that way. So, it was sort of nice, particularly because, the industry could theorize what the up and the down was for him and WWE. Oh gosh, if he loses, does that ruin him in WWE? Will nobody believe that he's still a monster if he loses? That was all the stupidity going in. So, the fact that, he ended up being a monster is pretty cool. Because now everybody did a happy dance, particularly the, UFC had worked for them, and WWE has to be going, oh my God, the monster's coming back in and proving he can kill people everywhere. It's,
Yeah, I saw.
And then Randy Orton gets to be the lucky guy to go into that. So that's,
yeah.
for him.
They did during the UFC pay-per-view. They promoted the SummerSlam match. They showed the graphic with him and Randy Orton, and they even promoted the WWE video game with him. So I'm sure that was part of the deal for Vince with Brock Lesnar.
That's one of the advantages. One of the reasons why Brock makes a lot of money from both, and WWE gave him the money afterward, was that basically having that synergy and having a truly legitimate badass that works on both sides of the wrestling fence, it's the perfect thing. It's the same thing Angle had in credibility coming in as a true Olympian.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to deny that, and it's actually a throwback, if you think of it, to the way a lot of guys did wrestling back in the day. Eddie Graham, for example, was well known for primarily hiring guys that could actually wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
They all were, Olympic athletes like Bob Roop, or go back before that, he loved Jack Briscoe because he was legit. College star Jerry Briscoe was was a legit star. Hiro Metsu had a legitimate background. Dale Lewis, another guy that wrestled for him. All the guys, and he pushed them regardless of charisma because they were real, and everything they did was real because, well, they could do the real stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not everybody can translate that way, but that used to be the old school. So spin forward, and now Brock is sort of the epitome of that now.
Yeah.
Of being a crossover in two things that validate both of them.
Yeah, I heard some people saying, well, you could give legitimacy to that fake world of wrestling now because of last night, but I don't buy.
Wrestling has its own legitimacy. It doesn't have to worry about it, and anyone who questions the authenticity of what wrestling is isn't paying attention to what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If your expectation is something beyond what wrestling does, for the reason you like it, then you're always going to be disappointed. But wrestling is somewhere between a pure athletic and at the other end improv theater. It's the perfect combo package of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only extemporaneous form, where literally what happens in the ring is decided relatively in the ring. I mean, there is no pure scripting of wrestling. There is no legitimate way you can say there's rehearsal. If you're doing a play, you rehearse for months to get the play, right? To find out staging and all the other stuff and blocking and all of the stuff they would do for all the moves.
Right.
Well, wrestlers don't do that. They don't have the time to do it. They show up at the building at 2 p.m. and they go on 5-6 hours later. That's not a lot of time. So wrestling's a unique art form.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
UFC is illegitimate. I'm going to try to kill you.
Yeah.
So to have them both being able to coexist is a good thing, but nobody should expect wrestling to be that worried about that other form, because to aspire to that too much is to ruin what you're already doing well.
Yeah.
Wrestling will always be what wrestling is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah.
And if you try to make wrestling too real, inevitably you get to the point where, and I mean too real in terms of pure reality, then it's okay. How close do we get to really hurting people? How much do we let people bleed? Which used to be a way that people went to access the deathmatch things, which still happen, where the whole genre is built around stuff that is literally very, very dangerous. And the only thing you can say about a deathmatch is, so far, to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever fulfilled on the stipulation of a deathmatch.
Yeah.
No one who's promoted it has actually delivered death yet, that I'm aware. I know people that have been airlifted from them, to hospitals, people who are gushing blood everywhere. So that's the farthest end of pro wrestling. Mm-hmm. The one that's trying so hard to have the sense of reality suspended, where you really are nervous about the outcome at a level that's uncomfortable. It's the horror movie side of pro wrestling, and that's the farthest extreme of wrestling that's closest to reality. And if you notice, that has nothing to do with UFC.
Right.
So that's wrestling.
Yeah.
It's different.
I mean, they definitely have their similarities, but they are completely two different things. Would you buy into the notion that WWE doesn't consider UFC competition, or vice versa?
No, they're synergistic. They're not competitive per se, except that everybody that performs in any specific theater. So if you're on pay-per-view if you're on the pay-per-view platforms with each other, there's an element of competition. Simply because if everybody draws good numbers and then it gets competitive, that's always fun, because there's always a ranking of things, who is doing the best everywhere. So it's always nice to be that way. But in terms of looking at them as competition, they don't run that frequently. So it's not that it can be that competitive. They're not a regularly run live event forum. Mm-hmm. They do pay-per-views, and they build to those much as boxing used to. So I think it's a different business. While there's shows built around UFC, it's not really the same business or the same level of what wrestling has in terms of its television platforms, entertainment platforms. Wrestling's a larger entity. UFC is much, I think, more self-contained in what it is, and there's only so far they can go, because there's only so much you can do with characters who are absolutely have to be real, because they're not trying to schlock it up. Mm-hmm. They want guys with personality, but they don't necessarily need Fandango.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. We could let's jump into your story and whatnot now. You're originally from Miami, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Miami. It's where I started watching wrestling. Which back in the day, because I'm old, the wrestling was on Channel 6. And then it would come on the Fort Lauderdale station, Channel 39. And then, depending on how much patience you had, you might be able to get the West Palm station, because everything was bicycled, and all the shows were similar and had similar matches. And sometimes you saw 1 week of one week of another, just depending on what the live event schedule was. But you could see all these sort of, and all the promos were different. Which was always fun. And so I was, once I found it, and the first match I ever saw was Johnny Valentine in a TV match with somebody. And that's pretty much everything that probably everyone remembered about that guy. But what I saw was Johnny Valentine went out and literally kicked the shit out of this guy. I mean, it was unmerciful. It was, the guy had nothing, got nothing, and was destroyed in a way that, as I'm looking at it in my early teens, was totally believable.
Right.
And as I learned later, was easy to be totally believable because Johnny Valentine literally kicked the shit out of him. So, it didn't have to be that specific match, but that's what Johnny Valentine did. He worked very, very tight. And he was supposedly a very unpleasant guy regardless. But a tough SOB.
Yeah.
But that was my first match. And Eddie Graham, what happened to be, was the primary booker with other guys helping at different times, some of whom I actually ended up working with eventually, which is sort of cool. And I'm watching some of the best booking that ever happened. And it was based on, as I said earlier, legitimate athletes. My favorite wrestler at the early time was probably Jack Briscoe. That was the guy I thought was good first. Good-looking guy who could wrestle his ass off. I liked him. Then I liked Joe Scarpa when he was down there, when he wasn't an Indian. And he did Sleeper, which I thought was cool. And then there was Boris Malenko was a great villain, so I loved to hate him. And there were various other guys that were very entertaining. So I started and I went to some live matches, so I got involved in it. And then eventually, spin forward, I was in the TV business, which was 20 years of my life, give or take, and with a little bit of overlap with wrestling. And I was out putting TV shows on, and eventually, wrestling came to me in that I was at conventions and walking around, and I'm a wrestling fan, so I say hi to people. They'd learn who I was. The word would get around, and people get to me, can you help me with my TV show? So, of course, I'm a fan. Hey, this is pretty cool. I might actually meet somebody and be able to mark out. Awesome for me.
Right.
So that's how that started, and the initial people that contacted, well, it was a two-sided thing. There was also simultaneously the growth of regional sports networks, and the primary sports network that was starting out was called Prime Sports. And it had a variety of owned stations, Prime this, Prime that, and affiliates, like Sunbelt was an affiliate down in Florida, and Nesson up in New England was an affiliate. But they were covering, at that point, 20-something, 30-some% of the country, and the only way they was going to grow as a business is they needed to acquire programming. I was doing business with them because right around this time, which had been mid to late 80s, but it may have been in the early 90s. But anyway, in this time, I was working in Atlanta, running the syndication for a company called World Sports that did NASCAR for ABC and did the races on TBS at the time, were the Charlotte and the Richmond races. And I was involved in that, and then I was putting a separate package of Busch Grand National events on stations in as many places that would take them to satisfy the advertisers, basically. And we ended up getting a really nice coverage around the Southeast with this. It was the first direct on-TV NASCAR at the time. And through that, I was dealing with also the regional sports networks because they had a add-on side to this because they were trying to acquire product. And so this was easy products, filled up a lot of time, and was good, produced by the real company. So they were happy as clams. So I'm getting to meet all the executives in the Prime Network. Well, at some point, I had been talking to these wrestlers, helping out a few here and there. Eddie Mansfield in Florida, Mike Graham down in Florida eventually. Continental with Woods, who was a station owner who had bought that, and various other promotions. And eventually it got to, I was connected with all these promotions, and I said to Prime, I could probably get you 5 TV shows. Do you want to do a show Monday through Friday at 11 o'clock or something? And they eventually did. And so that was my first real major involvement, was putting things on from there. And through that, eventually I got a phone call from Jerry Jarrett asking me to help him. And that was when I really got started in the business, which was 1993.
Right, okay. Now, you're from Miami, but you're in Georgia now, right? Is that?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
I moved to Georgia to go to college, went to law school for a year, decided that wasn't going to work out as well as I'd hoped. Didn't have the patience for it, and then I moved back to Georgia and have been here ever since. So,
okay. I'm
Georgian without a southern accent unless I fake one.
There it is, okay. How much of Miami went with you to Georgia?
How much what?
How much of Miami went with you to Georgia?
Oh, not
No.
No, unfortunately, I had a wonderful time growing up. The Miami I grew up in was a fairly cool place. And then progressively, it got more weird and dangerous, and then just different as I was growing up. So by the time I was going to college, I was heading to college, and in the Miami Vice time, I was out, and that was my late teen, 20s, late years, and there, the Miami Vice stuff was starting to go on. All of a sudden, it was drugs and cocaine everywhere, and Miami became a very different place than when I grew up.
Right.
I got out of Miami in 73, 74. So, and then I would, I'd go back to visit mom and dad off and on, and I eventually would go back periodically when I was working with my family in the early 80s, helping them with their television programming.
Yeah, because it was your parents.
I spent a lot of time down there off and on, but I ended up liking Georgia more than Miami as Miami changed.
Right. It was your parents that initially got you into television, like production as a career, right?
Yeah. I was, my dad was a first in radio out of college and in Vermont. He was the Dick Clark of Vermont. Elvis would go up there to appear on his show. I don't think Elvis ever did, but everybody else did back in that time. But regardless, it was Bob Allen and Robert Allen Behrens. And he was very, very good. And eventually, though, because of how everything was back in the day, things got on TV being attached to an advertiser, different than now, where the TV gets the stuff and the advertisers buy stuff from them.
Right.
But back then, you went to the advertiser and you packaged with an advertiser, and then you went to the station or group of stations, depending on what you could put together. It's the 50s. And you tried to put something on TV. So my dad got involved in that because he was making only so much money at radio. There was a TV station in town. He could do announcing work for them, work on the radio at one point, and then he gets to working on the sales, and he got good at it, and he was hired by one of the early TV syndication companies called Official Films. There was Ziv and Official Films back in the day, and no one probably listening to this cares at all. But regardless, he ended up being very good, and he was selling stuff but really not happy with it, making a lot of money. He had a really nice car. He had a Jaguar XKE. He was doing really well. And but all of a sudden he decided that he was miserable, so he quit. And he decided he wanted to be in production, but he had never done it before. And he wanted to do children's programming because he thought it was a niche that was being underdeveloped. So I became, with my sister and our friends and relatives at some time, became the stars of various TV shows in my early life. So I was constantly in TV studios doing silly things. It was sort of like it was a low rent Little Rascals in the first one, and then it went to little stories about people all around the United States, and then the last one that we worked on was a news program for children, which is probably the most popular, called Kids World, and then became Young Universe. And actually stations across the country produced their own version of the show for a while. So that was my start. Eventually, I was a child star. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wasn't going to do anything with the family. I didn't. I was in Atlanta. I helped out at a show with my dad. He said, "Why don't you go on the road and sell the TV show?" I said, "Okay." He took me on the road for a couple of days, left me in Baton Rouge, and told me, "Do the best you can." And we did pretty well. In 1 year, we billed over $1 million with the little TV show we were doing, which is a nice thing, and I got to help with that. But eventually, what we were doing, I couldn't do better at. There wasn't enough other stuff. So you're selling the same thing over and over, and there's no way to put more sizzle on what it is. So I quit. And then I went to work for a variety of companies, set up my own company in the middle after one went out of business, called Show Business Inc., which is still what I do. And the last major job I had in television was with Universal Television. And then they wanted me exclusively. I said no, not because of wrestling, but simply because of other factors. And eventually wrestling became the thing that I graduated to, because what I did well in television, which was convince people to put shows on TV, got consolidated, so fewer people are making those decisions, and guys in my position that were running a regional area really wouldn't go do that spot. We wouldn't go do the pitch. We wouldn't go sell the show. We'd be the guys that would go to town and go, "Hey, do you like that car you bought?" within a television context, and take him out to lunch and, hey, are you happy with us?
Yeah.
And I, God knows, I would have wanted to shoot myself if I'd done that.
Yeah. Okay.
So eventually I flowed into wrestling, and then everything else was happenstance. Everything was a phone call. Jerry Jarrett called me, and it led to me working with USWA till it went out of business. That led immediately to me working with Bert Prentice on the thing we did in Nashville, NWA Worldwide, which started as Music City Wrestling, went to, and then NWA Worldwide when I joined the NWA. Before that, I had also been called by Jimmy Cornette to help him out because I had met him at one point. I was interacting with the WWE because I was under contract to them during this period of time, both as a consultant and because of the TV shows we were doing throughout all of this. And in the middle of all that, when Jerry Jarrett jumped, I jumped to WCW for a year and a half, and then immediately went back to WWE. So I was. It was really quick that everything started to happen.
Right.
And then when one thing would end, somehow something else would happen. I wasn't making phone calls, but fortunately things kept progressing. TNA came into business, worked with them, began working with talent because I found it was the area I could help the most. Then, my primary guy was AJ.
Yeah.
And AJ's done okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I got the help.
Yeah, definitely. There's a bunch of stuff you mentioned in there I want to touch on. It was like the mid '80s that you said that the wrestling company started reaching out to you, but it was actually a letter that you wrote to PW Torch. It was about Jim Crockett that Jerry Jarrett seen, and he was impressed with your knowledge.
Wade Keller was a kid in college at the time, and he had just started a newsletter following the Observer one. And there were a couple others at the time. There was the Lariat, and there was 3 or 4 guys. There was a handful of guys doing these things, some smarter in quotations than the others, and nobody really totally connected, which is the way it still is, bless their hearts. Most of the internet journalists get only the part of the story they do, and because most of them, and some of them all the time, are not journalists, they don't follow up completely like a good reporter would, where you actually find out the things you don't know that you're guessing on. Wrestling journalism, of course, is just guessing. The guys that are writing stuff are taking an inch of a story and then getting as much out of it as they possibly can theorize could happen. Mm-hmm. So it's like they're booking something based on what little germ of a fact they have, and that's most of wrestling journalism.
Yeah.
But this Torch thing, Jim Crockett had a no-compete when the company was sold off, and the no-compete was up, and he'd been running an ice cream shop down in Texas before that, and he had some money, and he decided he wanted to get into wrestling, and so this is 92, 93. Mm-hmm. And he decided he was going to do a TV taping, and he hired, Tommy Rich and Sid Vicious, and he had, a lot of guys and a decent amount of money in it. And then the weirdest thing was not only was he paying these guys a lot because I was aware of some of what the pay was because I was starting to get connected a little bit, but he said he was going to do this in high definition television. And this is again, 1992.
Yeah, there's not like it is now.
Does anyone, even if they were born in 1992, nobody remembers high def until 5-6 years ago?
Yeah.
Maybe a few more. But high def took forever to implement because, and at the time he's talking about it, literally the only time we had ever seen it in the industry was at all the conventions. The Japanese people were nice enough to bring the experiment they were working on, and we would go watch a nature movie on the thing and go, wow, that's pretty cool. But nobody was going, wow, that's so exciting, we want to do it right now. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that much better because the TVs weren't that much better. Part of the problem.
Yeah.
The TVs were tube TVs, and the high-definition television required a whole different mechanism to show it, which nobody had thought well about whenever they started getting excited about it in terms of implementing it with TV stations. Well, if you have it on TV stations, people have to be able to watch it on a TV that'll let you see it. And most tube TVs had curved screens, if you think that.
Yeah.
So the end game was there was a lot of time. So, this idiot, I don't want to be that say to me, but Jim was not smart in this particular thing. He's just wasting money in a product that's never aired. And I don't know if it even exists because that'd be sort of a cool thing to see was the first tape because it never appeared in any form I'm aware because it was in high def. And it was super expensive, and the cameras were these gigantic, it was just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a letter about it, and in the letter I also gave my seasoned opinion for what little I knew at the time about the value of a wrestler and the unrealistic expectation, because one of the first things I started learning about wrestling was everybody has these stars in their eyes, and it's from the promoters all the way down to the talent that causes them to be truly blind. They really don't see.
Right.
Like, a tangent, but I'll give you an example. There's wrestlers, and I bitch about this all the time, guys that are out of shape. If you look at the people that have jobs, and you can categorize why. You can look at them and go, oh, I understand why that guy's actually making a living. But there are wrestlers all over the United States, and lots of them, who are constantly going, I've got 10 years in the business, I don't understand how I didn't make it. And the guy, it may be a guy that's wearing a T-shirt, it may be a guy that's skinny as a rail, people that don't go to gyms, are in okay shape but have a little bit of a belly, and none of them have any real characters, but they're all just, their eyes are so wide, and they believe that they should be making money. I say they're looking in a clown mirror. The one where if you're skinny, you can be fat, and if you're fat, you can be skinny. But that's what I learned about wrestling, and I was sort of writing about that in this letter, and out of nowhere, Jerry Jarrett, I think I'd given him a business card at one point, and Jerry's good enough, he probably actually remembered and kept it, which surprises me too.
Yeah.
But he called and he asked if I would help him expand his territory, because at the time they were running still regularly. USWA was doing Nashville, doing Memphis, doing Louisville, doing Jonesboro, and doing Jonesboro occasionally, and Evansville. So it still had a run, but Evansville they had a problem with, if I remember right. I eventually got that back. But he wanted me to set up a separate, smaller territory, a B circuit, that he wanted his son to run, Jeff. And, I'd never met. And so Jerry, blah, blah, blah. You get some TV stations within a blank amount, and I found a couple of markets where it was possible, and I put together, I think, three markets. When Jerry was ecstatic, and I had a deal where he paid me, it was going to be a reasonable amount of money, and he said, hey, would you call Jeff and tell him about this, and, introduce yourself, and blah, blah, blah. And, we're going to bicycle the tapes, it's going to be great. And I called Jeff, and Jeff said, will you call my dad back and tell him I don't want to be a promoter? So that was my introduction to the Jarretts, and at a large level. And then all of a sudden, I had these markets closed, and Jerry said, well, I have no problem. I'll send them the TV show, because who knows, maybe we'll figure out a way to do a spot show on our, without Jeff's help. But okay, how about backup plan? Because I said, Jerry, if we stick to the contract we have and I keep getting you markets, you will be paying me a lot of money based on the money you're paying me for these three.
Right.
And that's really not fair, because that's not what you were hiring me to do. You're going to pay me X amount to create a circuit, not to put the show all over the place.
Yeah.
And he said, right. He said, well, let's forget about that then. And we verbally canceled a written contract. And then he said, why don't you carry the show around while you're doing the syndication thing, and if you can put it on somewhere, we'll figure out how much it adds up to and see what we can do with it.
Okay.
And we'll figure out how to get you paid. And as long as it's not costing you anymore, do you mind doing that? And I said, sure, no problem. And I got it up to 50% of the country. And at that point, he called one day and he said, here's what's going to happen. WWE is going to contact you. You're going to do a deal with them. They're going to license USWA from you. By the way, I didn't own the show. But he said they're going to do it from you. And they're going to pay you to put their commercials in the slots, and they're going to distribute the show, and you'll coordinate with them. And they also want you to help out with their syndication and put their shows on and consult to the syndication division and, blah, blah, blah.
So
then I got to do one conference call with Vince, which was nice. So I enjoyed that.
Okay, so you mentioned you didn't know Jeff Jarrett beforehand working with USWA, but did you know Jerry Lawler beforehand?
I'd met Jerry at conventions. I did, but other than that, no. And he probably paid no attention to me nor seemed to, although he was very pleasant. But he had been at the conventions with Max Andrews at various times, because they were selling stuff at the tail end of what was USWA at one point, Global a little bit before that. Joe Pedicino was in also. But the time I know I met him was when Kerry Von Erich was in. So this must have been early to mid USWA before it started crashing.
Right.
Right after they had taken over from the from World Glass.
Okay.
When they did the thing with Eric Emery went up and changed over the company, and then the Jarretts were down. And basically, it was Memphis came to Texas, and so all the Memphis guys were down there, and they were doing back and forth stuff to USWA simultaneously. That's when Austin came in.
Right. Okay, so you, even maybe when you were younger, was there any ever aspirations of yourself stepping into the ring as a performer?
No.
No, never?
No, I take that. I played like all the other kids did, but no, I mean, I practiced with the wrestling team, but never wrestled competitively.
Uh-huh.
But I knew how to do some stuff from watching wrestling because Eddie Graham showed real wrestling moves, so I learned some. So I used to go practice with the wrestling team to help out the coach. The key would be I'd work out with the heavyweights, and they would have to try to stop me from getting away.
Okay. Nice.
So I was actually a not great, but mediocrely adequate athlete.
Right.
And then but I was more interested in, I was playing football and I played soccer, and I was mediocre at both, but I enjoyed doing it. And then in college, similar. So no, I was just fan. I enjoyed it whenever I could. I enjoyed the concept of it. I enjoyed the theater of it. And the more I found out, it didn't disappoint me more. The more I found out, it made me happier. And then I transitioned, and I guess it's the real reason I remain involved in it is if you get to be involved in the creative aspect of it or the development aspect of it, development being the talent, but the creative aspect being the product, whether it's a TV show or the live event, and you can work within the synergy of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the end game is that an audience buys it. You get a good response. Like anything in entertainment, whenever that happens, whether it's a standing ovation for a singer or a movie getting an Academy Award, in wrestling, if it works, people know. You know.
Mm-hmm.
You know if your creation works, and that's the ultimate satisfaction of wrestling. It's the improv theater that it is that's truly unique.
Mm-hmm.
Other than improv comedy, there's nothing comparable. In improv acting, and neither of those are done with the frequency of wrestling. Those are the niches, because most comedy is prearranged.
Mm-hmm.
Most acting is prearranged. Most wrestling is on the fly, and uniquely so.
Yeah,
So when you get elite athletes in wrestling, you're seeing something truly remarkable. People have started trying to rank them by 5 stars and something like this. What's truly remarkable, performances where you see a lot of high spots, those are awesome. But when you emotionally can get involved in the outcome and you get yourself sucked in, it's like a good movie. And the movies try harder to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so...
movies are all structured like wrestling matches anyway, by the way.
Yeah, they're very true. Yeah, very true.
They all start with the shine, go into the heat, you get a comeback, maybe 2, where the babyface looks like he's getting back over on the heel. Then you go back into the heat, usually before the finish. Then normally the babyface goes over in most of these things, except, in the quirky world, well, sometimes the heel will go over in a twisted ending. We do the heel in wrestling more than they do in the movies because we're perpetuating the continuity of the storyline more. Movies have a tendency to have to blow it off each time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Different format.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same concept, same building.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, at the same time you were working with USWA, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were working with Jim Cornette at the same time too, right?
Yes, although I didn't really tell Jerry about that. I just did it. Because I figured it was easier. It wasn't like there was a feud or anything, but I just didn't want anybody to get upset or about it, and don't ask, don't tell, so it didn't really matter. And with Corny, I was primarily just helping with the TV, and I didn't want Jerry to think it was going to be in conflict with the TV we were doing, and in the reality, he knew, even though I didn't talk to him about it, and he didn't bring it up to me because it never created a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jimmy had reached out to me. I forget what context. I think I'd been, I don't remember whether he was in the office at WWE when I first met him. Yeah, must have been. And then he got to me when he came out there and did Smoky Mountain. Yeah, so it was that transition when he was with Jim Ross in the office for a while.
So was there ever like any conflict of interest though between Cornette and Jarrett? Like for you?
If I'd been putting one show on in a market instead of the other ever, yes, there would have been a conflict. But I didn't, so there never was.
Okay. Well, was there ever a feeling?
It was totally up to me to prevent a conflict of interest. There's no assumption of a conflict of interest in law. It's a presentation of the reasonable reality of it occurring, and if I made sure it didn't occur, then there could never be a conflict of interest. Remember, I went to 1 year of law school.
Yeah. So yeah.
And according to TNA, at one point, I am a lawyer.
So I mean, you controlled it though. You handled it well there. I mean,
and Corny was doing a different thing because he was not going toward Jerry's territory deliberately, or as Jerry perceived it, and Jerry wasn't taking his live event into our greater distribution. It was just our greater distribution. So Jimmy was expanding east and south, and so in no way was going to conflict with what Jerry was doing, nor with what RDP was doing. So it was apples oranges.
I gotcha. Well, was there ever a feeling for you though that maybe you were putting too much on your plate at one time, or no?
No, I always enjoyed juggling stuff.
Okay, cool. All right, so that
no, I've never had a problem with that. I'm older now, so I juggle fewer things.
Right.
Enjoy juggling.
So that led to you starting your own promotion. You mentioned before it was Music City Wrestling, and then that became the NWA affiliate.
Well, I can't claim credit for starting that. I got into business with Bert Prentice. Bert Prentice is the ultimate promoter, at least on the small market level. There's, in my experience, no one who is better than him. Other people may be as good, but there's nobody better. And he's also uniquely talented at getting money out of people once they're in the building. And I mean, totally legitimately, to the point where the people are dying to give them the money. Skills I did not have, which is why I am a terrible promoter. And it was there that I learned what I could do, and he allowed me the opportunity to learn, and I had great people who had been teaching me. Jerry Jarrett, and then I worked with Dutch Mantel at the end, and literally in the booking of USWA at the very end. I can't claim to have done more than edit,
right?
But I got to do that, and Bert and I worked together, and were the only guys allowed in the building to run the final USWA taping. Everybody else was suing themselves at the time. Eventually, I got sued, but that got thrown out almost immediately. But regardless, you know, Bert, we started doing the Bert thing. He was the promoter. I was TV boy, and that was basically the storyline we created eventually when I was a heel in the company, which I did until I got tired of driving over the mountain from Atlanta because I had moved there. And when I moved there, I started promoting badly, but promoting regularly. And I'd never lost money, thank goodness. But it was such a hard process. And hats off to anybody who tries to make wrestling promoting their living. Bert Prentice makes a living from professional wrestling and promoting and other aspects of the wrestling business. I make my living in the professional wrestling business 100%. That is what I do. There are very few people promoting who make their living in the professional wrestling business, which is why promoting is iffy. Because if you can't devote your whole attention to it, you'll do it half-assed. You may do a couple things well, but it's hard to have a hobby that's wrestling if you're trying to promote on the regular. If you're just an event promoter and you stretch them out and you've established that business that way, that's fine. So then there's a very narrow category of really good promoters that are out there. Bert was one of the best and still is. He threw a great house this last weekend. So the end game of doing that is, again, another learning experience, just like USWA was for me. And I learned a lot more there, hands-on, on better execution of television, hands-on with more control because I was involved in what we were doing. And then Stephen Dunn was the booker for a while, and I got to work with him, and he was very smart, great kid. And Dutch Mantel I got to work with again, and Dutch is brilliant. And Dutch had learned from Eddie Graham, and from Jerry Jarrett. So all of a sudden, Jerry had learned from Eddie Graham. That was his mentor too. So everything's starting. I'm getting all of this really good wrestling education, which nobody can get anymore because there are few of us that actually were at least around it enough that we could learn the way it was, literally the way it was. I came into the very end of that. And there's really no way for anybody now that gets into wrestling to really truly understand hands-on and, face-to-face the process of regional wrestling promoting, making money in the wrestling business as a business.
Right.
For people now, it's a side business, some more than others, and everybody that aspires to be bigger usually goes out of business and loses a lot of money.
Yep. That's very true. So that NWA Wildside, you were a promoter, you mentioned, for there?
Yeah, Wildside was the final thing, and probably the best thing we all did, myself and the people that are nice enough to be there helping me. But again, preceding that, I'd been doing Music City. I did MCW Georgia first. It was very entertaining. Music City Wrestling Georgia. And then another promoter had the NWA thing that I had helped, and I was actually booking his first shows, and he was a tragic failure, bless his heart. And the end result of it was that the NWA membership was available, and I was already the member up in North Carolina, not North Carolina, in Tennessee. And so I ended up with Georgia. And I started promoting in Georgia to justify having the freaking membership, and I was doing Loganville on the regular, then Stockbridge pretty regularly on Sundays, and spot shows here and there in various bars, and and a lot of travel, and you have to do most of the work yourself. And trust me, no one should ever enjoy going to Sam's Club to buy cheese, and that's what I did for years.
Very good.
But so doing it on all these buildings in different places, and you're driving and here this day and here this day and this. And I'm still selling TV shows simultaneously, so this is like really getting to be ridiculous. And then all of a sudden, a couple of guys that have been running shows in Cornelia, Georgia, Ray Rawls, Rick Michaels, and Steve Martin, who was called himself Chance Williams at the time. Why would he call himself Steve Martin? That name will never get old.
Yeah.
They came in, and first day they came in, I was supposed to look at what they were doing there, and I got busy at the show and never did, and Steve Martin got grumpy, but Rick got him back, Ray. And eventually, basically, they said, we want you to come in and we'll start a partnership. And so I figured out a deal sort of like the one I had with Bert, which is everything you do in your building, you control and you keep all the money. And I will create the TV show. And if I can figure out a way to make any money from the TV show, which they also had to have all the cameras in place and do all the hardware part of it. Mm-hmm. But once the show got to me, once everything was done, then if I made any money after that, it's fine. Otherwise, they made all the money from whatever was happening. But I also had no expense in theory. And I was trying to open them. They agreed to that, and we went into a 50-50 partnership with their side of it and me. And then over time, Rick, I guess, sold out at some level to Steve at one point, and I finally got rid of Steve by using money I'd gotten from a DVD I had sold. And then I became the eventual full owner, which was for the last 2.5 years. But during that period, I consolidated what I had been doing into one building, and it was always set up. It was always ready to go. And the only thing you had to do was clean up afterward. Mm-hmm. Which, trust me, if you've done the other, load in, load out, bring the ring, load, bring it up, take it down, do all that. If you ever want to be in the wrestling business again, if you have to do that much work to get a little bit of money, then you literally are just in love with the business, because it is really hard to do, and there's a narrow group of people that are in love with that. Mm-hmm. And I was not. Yeah. Putting up rings, taking them down, not so much fun.
Okay.
Way too much sweating and work.
Yeah.
So I translated into Wildside, and then I learned what I really was in business to do, which is, okay, I've figured out what I can do. I am not a wrestler, yet I have. I will never teach anyone to purely wrestle, yet I can tell you what you're doing right or wrong, and I can tell you why. I can literally show them what they're doing wrong and be right. And I can affect how they talk, and I can affect how what their name is and who they are, and try to help them become characters and performers. I learned that I could develop people, and I learned also that I could represent them and help them get deals. So I translated into that spot, and Wildside was the beginning of it, because I took over the book basically. After seeing what the other guys wanted to do, and I always let them help, but the reality is I can only let them help. And Rick Michaels was the biggest help. Steve Martin had a very narrow category of what he liked, and what he liked wasn't what was going to work, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So we transitioned in over time. First we started with Hot Feuds as the transition. The one that got us recognized probably the most was AJ and Air Paris. And that led to, we were doing NWA stuff at the time, and so we had Sabu coming in, and we had various other people coming in at various times. We were getting ECW guys were coming in at various times. So we were becoming sort of the cool kid. Then all of a sudden, all the Northeast people, and we had Texas people coming in, so we were showcasing Briscoe versus Briscoe, Jay versus Mark for the second time ever. The SAT were coming in with Amazing Red in the trunk. And then I had Delirious and Matt Seidel and Daisy Hayes and various kids from South St. Louis driving all the way for almost nothing, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had people from Texas that Rudy Boy would bring in. We became the hot place to be that paid no money. And we were the hot place to be, but I would drive through Hell and Creation, and if I got $50, I would die and go to heaven.
Yeah.
Drive all the way from Louisiana. Luke Hawks came in and brought people in. He was Altar Boy then. And all from Florida, Jarrell Clark and the Heavenly Bodies, and all of these guys are driving in from all over the place, from every direction. Kenny Doane came in, literally I didn't know when he was 15 years old.
Wow.
And we had just all these guys from everywhere wanted to be there and had matches they were proud of and television exposure because I still had that. And the industry was still where I could do that. So we still had a whole bunch of folk, including TV in Atlanta, where people could see what we were doing.
Yeah.
And eventually WCW hired us.
Yeah.
And we did development for those guys.
Mm-hmm. So that was...
And eventually the company went out of business because WWE hired me again to start their development, which was a tragic failure, at least for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, it became the developmental for WCW, and that was based on your previous relationship with Jarrett?
No, actually the WCW, long story short, Burt Prentice had a half-ass version of it after, where were they before? Anyway, Burt was doing some stuff with some of the talent, but it was only working as well as it was, and they finally decided to get out of that for various reasons. Terry Taylor was in the WCW office with J.J. Dillon. Terry had been coming up to our shows, and in fact had appeared on one of my shows. And Terry had gotten in touch and said, it's between you and Les Thatcher as to where we want the talent to go, and then we'll do a deal and blah, blah, blah. And then what they basically, I guess JJ went up and didn't like Les's thing for some reason. I have no idea why, because Les is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they liked what we were doing, and I went in and had a meeting, and I came up with a creative version of a deal that they really liked that had no risk for them, only reward, and allowed me to get paid simultaneously. And we were there with all their talent until the company went out of business. We were technically the development area. At first, everybody was coming because the original theory was to try to let guys work their matches out or get more ring time in because of what was going on. I mean, 3 Count was my tag champions for the day.
Mm.
So we had a lot of fun during that time. We were running a lot of shows because they were being subsidized basically by the talent. I was paid by each every time how do I say this? Everybody they booked with me,
Mm-hmm.
they paid me a fee to book, rather than me getting a fee to do the job.
Right.
So the way it benefited them was the more people they got ring time for that they believed they needed to go do something for whatever reason, they would pay me to have that guy in a show. So weirdly, this is like bad New Jersey wrestling where the guys do the fan battle royal where the fans have to pay to get in the ring to do bad wrestling. This was sort of my version of the deal, which was, if you want to send the guys, I'm willing to just get paid for the guys you send. And we came up with a minimum per show, and had to guarantee I would do X number of shows a week to justify the thing. So I said, we'll do 3 shows a week. And we figured that we did a Friday and Saturday at our building, and then Rick Michaels promoted in Toccoa, and periodically we'd do other shows. And in fact, one week we had 5 in a row. So we were doing a lot of promoting, but it was easy still, because all the things we do, except for occasional spot shows, we didn't have to load in, load out. Because, again, not a fan of loading in, loading out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the time. That was a good time. And then beyond that, it just continued. We were still developing. TNA went into business 2002. Right after that, I was working with them, continuing to do this. So even in the transition, we even had Jeremy Barash and Ed Ferrara and all those guys coming in to get practice going forward. Don West coming in to get his first announcing practice. So we were then the training ground for TNA, and then TNA got started, and we're working with them.
Okay, so you ended up leaving Wildside, and it shut down after you left, and then you left TNA too for the WWE Deep South deal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I left both. Yeah, because they were going to let me have the creative control over the television product. I would work with the other guys on the specific booking, but I was in charge of the content. That was the contract.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also be involved in talent development. Obviously, if I'm doing the TV and promos and stuff, I sort of gotta be. So all that was all the stuff, and then I was a consultant to other things. And the easiest way to say it is, Billy and Joe, Bill DeMott, Joe Hamilton, would preferred that I didn't have what my contract said I was supposed to do as my authority. They preferred it to be different. And accordingly, they didn't really let me do what I was supposed to do, and they wanted me to do what they wanted to do their way and just be happy to get paid and show up minimally. And since my contract said I was the one responsible, the end game would be if we sent them product they didn't like, it would have my name on it. And so I said, I can't do that.
Yeah.
So 3 months in, and then Jeff Jarrett happened to call. I did not reach out when this was all going on, and somebody may have smartened him up. I don't know. Maybe Tommy did. And then Jeff said, Bill, how you doing? And I said, not well. It sucks. And he said, well, I got an idea. We've got to figure out a way to grow, and I think you can help us do that. And and he pitched an idea, and we had a what if meeting, and I ended up resigning from one after WWE tried to make it better, and it wasn't going to work out. And so I left the WWE thing and immediately went to TNA and had a good 2-year job with them.
Okay.
Booking the talent out, which was a primary funding system. During the time I was there, we brought in about $2 million that helped TNA pay talent. So that was the job Jeff suggested. The CEO at the time, a great guy whose name escapes me, but great guy, came up with an idea to have indie promoters basically subsidize the growth of the company. And it did.
Yeah.
$2 million allowed us to put a variety of talent under guaranteed contracts because the money all had to come through us. It was all credited against, all the indie money was credited against the money we were giving them in advance. So it was a way to get them paid and an incentive to us to book them out if we couldn't use them on shows ourselves. And eventually it led to house shows. And then the perception was what I was doing was contradictory to the growth of house shows.
Right, okay.
Which was true, but they made a decision probably a year earlier than they needed to. And that wasn't necessarily for me to make the money, but rather it would have helped the talent during the transition because when they first started doing house shows, there weren't that many. And they were only booking 14 to 18 people, and they had 35 to 40 on roster. So,
yeah,
logic dictates if you let the rest of the guys go make some indie money, they're happier.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. So then, leaving Wildside for WWE and then leaving WWE to go back to TNA. I mean, what kind of went into those decisions? Was it like?
I was miserable at WWE. It wasn't the job I've been hired for, and I wasn't being respected.
Right.
I've never been somebody that simply wants to get paid for standing around. I can't do that. I have to be allowed to do what I'm doing, and there's an element of ego and stupidity involved in it, but that it is what it is. I mean, I got to be happy. And I was miserable. I literally was miserable during that time.
Right.
So I had to get out of it. And TNA, I lost a lot of money early in TNA. I eventually made money at the tail end of it, thank God. But early on, it was simply everybody trying the best they did. And if every account you've read after the fact from TNA, you can't come away with any other feeling other than, gosh, there's no way this thing should have survived.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's true. It's what TNA was. And we were all in a fight. And when we got to the fairgrounds, it was hectic and running around, but it was fun. We had a ball, and literally we all had a ball, and I was making no money at all, and I was driving back and forth, and none of us were making really any real money, and eventually, I'm managing AJ, and that's when I started booking guys out, and that's when because I needed the money.
Mm-hmm.
I was running into huge credit card debt just working for TNA. That was the reality of all of us. I mean, the Jarretts had it a whole lot worse, because they were losing everything.
Yeah.
Until Panda came in, it looks like it was all going away, and then Panda lost a bucket of money. So the fact TNA existed and that all of us got paid for a while at any level was simply remarkable. And the fact that it still exists, no matter how flawed it is today, and God knows it is, thank God it's still around so some guys can get paid. It's nothing, but the TNA today and what it is today is just so not what I enjoyed. I had a ball, more or less, with TNA from 2002 to 2008. I was there most of the time. I was gone 3.5 months.
Okay.
And and all of it was fun for a variety of reasons. But those early days are the ones that those of us that were there, and most of them, aren't with TNA anymore. James Storm and Jeremy Brash are it, basically.
Yeah.
There's nobody else around. And this came in, partway through at the end of the first year. So he's not even original, but yet he's been around forever, too. But there's not that many guys who can look back and remember what really got the company going.
Yeah, it's true.
That are there now. It's a totally different animal. It'd be like visiting an indie show for me. So, which is why now I'm primarily involved in helping Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling and the big people I was working with right after AJ left TNA and that we got into business with. So,
were you let go by TNA or you left on your own?
No, they let me go.
Oh, okay.
It's the only time I've ever been fired, too.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah, it was Andy Barton, the guy that was there, bless his heart, who I really never understood why he was there, but he certainly was. Andy was Dixie's second in command. He had been with her, I guess, since college. And he got in his mind, he never understood my contract anyway. And he never understood the contract I created for TNA either. He left. The only meeting I had on it with him, with Dean, he walked out when it started getting confusing. So Andy had this feeling that my booking the third parties, I was somehow positioning talent in how I was booking them and how I was putting people on house shows, because I was also booking the house shows that were then being approved by Terry Taylor. So really, Terry was the end booker. I was just putting the cards together. Mm-hmm. And then I'd say, Terry, does this work for you? And he'd go, yeah, that makes sense. That storyline, based on the talent, we always had a budget. It's a monkey could do the job. But anyway, I was doing it. I was the monkey at this point. But he began to think that was a conflict, word you used earlier with Smoky Mountain and USWA. And it wasn't a conflict at all, because actually it was synergistic, because we knew what we needed to book. Terry was approving it, which meant the company had control over it because Terry was the talent guy. And I was then booking who was left on indies. It was never the other way around. But he decided it was. So he decided, and he convinced Dixie, which was easy for him, that it was something bad somehow. So they let me go, which was fine. Because I got a couple of years out of them, which was fine too.
Right.
Nothing in wrestling has any sense of permanency, and anyone going into wrestling should understand that in anything in entertainment, from the corporate side down, if you think you're in until retirement, you are sorely mistaken. There is no such creature in entertainment.
Right.
It does not happen. Mm-hmm. And Vince is the one that is the closest to making making it happen because he's so loyal to people who help out that he'll keep people on, paying them when you have no idea why.
Yeah.
So like Brooklyn Balder was just let go, and people went, "Oh my God, I can't believe he was let go."
Yeah.
He was there forever.
32 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just was, worked at Indie Show, and it was his first appearance since leaving WWE for Legendary Action Wrestling in Brooklyn.
He's a great guy.
He is.
But even he, I'm sure, is, he can't be going, "God, I can't believe they let me go so young when I was so young."
Yeah.
He's got to be going, "Thank God I had the ride I had," because that's wrestling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can always tell when somebody really isn't when they're delusional at some level in wrestling is when they get mad about what they weren't allowed to accomplish when they're always responsible for that at some level. And nobody ever, the guys that get bitter always forget that they got to the point. To get bitter, you had to actually accomplish something. If you lose it all and then you leave and you look back, "Oh, I can't believe that guy screwed me," but what about the run you had? Again, if a TV show fails, "Oh, dang that network, we could have done 3 more seasons." It didn't work out that way.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that mindset in wrestling, and if you're a performer in wrestling, you have to have that mindset. Again, going back to the clown mirror, being realistic, be honest with yourself when you aren't everything you think you are, and be appreciative of the things you've been allowed to accomplish.
Yeah.
Bitter, disgruntled wrestlers I've never understood.
Yeah.
But there are a ton of them, and veterans in locker rooms can be the worst poison sometimes.
Nature of the beast.
Yeah, but there's no reason for it.
Yeah.
Remember all the stuff you did. You were a rock star during your time if you had a run. That's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be a rock star your whole life. You aren't pretty when you're old. You get ugly. It's the way it works.
Yeah.
You were pretty when you were young. That's when you have all this stuff going on. So, and that's the depressing side of wrestling is guys getting mad about what little they have left of a business because they can't climb to the top of the same mountain again.
Right.
Michael Jackson had that happen. Look what a freak he became at the end.
Mm-hmm.
He got so high. How the hell do you get higher than that?
Yeah, exactly. There's only one way to go down after that.
All you can do is fall as far as possible, and by God, he did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Okay, so in your experience, how does a company successfully survive for any length of time that's not WWE?
Have a smart business plan. It is every beginning, middle, and end. The guys that are doing the best right now, Ring of Honor, owned by Sinclair Broadcasting. Sinclair is a billion-dollar company. Multimedia owner, cable owner, television station owner. They also control their own platform. Platform is how do you get your shows out? How do you establish your business? Ring of Honor has the best established small business of any wrestling company in wrestling because of that. They're not beholden on anyone because their own company provides their theater. And their company is profitable. That's the advantage of Ring of Honor. So as a growth industry, Ring of Honor is in a position to constantly grow and continue to feed because they also provide programming for those stations and for the potential networks, 2 of which they already own, 2 different cable networks. So you got Ring of Honor. The growth industry, only because it's working, but it's a very small one because it's an independent production, would be Lucha Underground. Its downside is it's not yet realized anything other than being a TV show. It doesn't have a live event platform. It doesn't have a strong ancillary platform, although it has a marginal. I think they're actually doing a T-shirt deal with Pro Wrestling Tees, if I remember right, but maybe not. But they really don't have a major business in place to grow vertically and horizontally as a business. WWE has that. All these branches off of a business tree. TNA lost it. Merchandise is minimal. Live event is non-existent. Television is the only revenue stream. So all of a sudden, the tree died.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you have to look at all of these businesses. How much of a structure can you build? Ring of Honor, again, go back to them and why are they viable and why are they the one to look at, because they're the one that won't go away, is they've got so many branches to a tree that's tied to a big-ass tree. A totally other tree.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and everybody else has to build their tree. And Lucha Underground, television show that's compelling on a very small network that's barely seen, and no aftermarket of any substance. That's a tough business, but they're a compelling product.
Yeah.
So you've got them. Otherwise, there's nobody else that's really. I mean, global Jeff's thing. Bless his heart, it's just a way for some guys to get booked.
Yeah.
It is, and it's a brand that he was smart in how he established, and he's been able to convince independent promoters, sort of like the NWA does now at some level, if not exactly. And anybody, whatever it is, WF, the other independent thing, but anybody that's branding outside your own brand, which is what Global's doing, is gravy, or it's a mechanism that the promoter thinks, oh, if I promote this under that brand, people are going to think this stuff smells better. And even if I book the same guys, it'll be better if I book them under this brand. And that's what Jeff's doing with his thing, is he's bringing a package of a few people, usually led by him and Karen, at a certain rate.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll help you promote it and use their synergies to try to make your show look bigger and more important because it's tied to this other thing that's being promoted. So that's what Global is, but that's a very limited growth business.
Yeah. Okay, so being involved in the TV aspect of wrestling for so long, like, what are your thoughts on how much wrestling is available now, like, across, like, multiple platforms, whether it be, like, the network or iPay-per-views, streaming services?
There's more wrestling available than the history of wrestling.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, there's networks be damned. YouTube alone, you could spend the rest of your life and never see the same match again if you wanted. You could find a way to watch a different match probably every hour of every day for the rest of your life and never repeat. There's so much stuff that's available now because of the internet, and there's a huge quantity of everywhere from terrible to excellent product that's being delivered at this point, which is both good and bad because there's now a larger area. The oases are smaller. So sometimes you're on a desert in terms of the quality of your wrestling until you finally get, oh, look, there's a tree, and then finally there's something good. So there's a lot of garbage that's being put out there because anybody now can do a fairly high quality digital shoot, and amazingly, still there are people that can't figure out how to do that. With even the cameras on phones have a high level of quality to light your subject properly.
Uh-huh.
And I get videos all the time from guys, and it's going, how the hell are you asking me to assess anything in this? This is terrible. A monkey could shoot this better.
Yeah.
So but no, there's more wrestling than ever before, both good and bad, because it used to be that most of the stuff was pretty good. Even back in the day when men wrestled bears, it was good. In general, the storytelling was compelling within the time frame. Now there's an awful lot of really bad execution of our art form. There's a lot of amateurs, but that's true now for the whole internet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of bad comedians. There's a lot of bad sex symbols. There's a lot of men and women getting over showing their private parts. There's this whole medium of everybody's trying to be a star at some minor level that wrestling's a part of because it's a larger genre. And so there's always going to be that low end of just kids trying to have fun, on their trampoline or in their backyard.
Yeah. Cool.
And that's bad.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because it's fun. I did my version of it as a kid, so I really can't ever get mad at a backyard thing. But the fact that it's so widely available to become replicated by other people, not necessarily in a positive way, it's, let me show you how to do something badly. Oh, hey, there's a good idea. That aspect of it, I think, is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because, now people may be getting introduced to what wrestling should be by what it isn't. Somebody doing it badly may be somebody's first impression, and they may never figure out the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned Like it has its positive and negatives of how much is available and like how easily it is available. My son, he's 8 years old, and he goes on his YouTube and he'll watch backyard people on trampolines, and like you said, just with an iPhone filming it, and they put it out on YouTube as like a whole federation type thing. You know what I mean? And
But,
he's hooked on that, and I'm like,
well, again, it's teaching a totally different direction without any context really or involvement. You can say, oh, with it, there, maybe that's going to be a transition point for wrestling. The key of what wrestling is, unfortunately, still is an element of willing suspension of disbelief. It's an element of believability. If all we go out and do is moves, then we're closer to being circus still lay. We're just
mm-hmm.
doing moves. We're rolling around. We're ballet. At that point we've moved into a different category. So that's the downside of the over move set aspect of wrestling. I understand it. The high spot thing, fireworks, and wrestling. Everything is like a fireworks display. In terms of how it's presented,
Mm-hmm.
the reality is you can dull the audience if you throw them too many fireworks in the wrong position.
Yeah. Cool.
So we'll see. I mean, right now, though, I think, wrestling is not what it was, nor ever will be again, because time passes and things change, and part of it has to do with how media grows,
Mm-hmm.
How our mechanism grows. You can't be a regional wrestling company where there's only 3 stations in the TV area and nobody can know what's going on outside of it. You can't do that business again. So we're doing the business we can do now with it, and it's still reaching millions of people. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about your company, SBI Bookings. You've been doing that the company I believe has been for over 10 years now, right?
The SBI Bookings, that website, probably 10 years.
Okay.
And I've been booking wrestlers for a couple of decades, and I've had my company, the Show Business Inc., since 1989.
Okay.
But the booking job, which is primarily what I do now, and also acting as an agent for some of the wrestlers in the contract negotiations. And AJ, of course, I just manage his career. A couple other guys I sort of manage their career, like Chris Daniels, Matt Seidel, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of it is spot booking for the guys that want me to help them, some more than others. Like Sean Waltman likes me to do everything. Kevin Nash, I do some things. But, basically what I provide is a service where I help them get shows. I negotiate all the detail. I babysit the booking and hand them an itinerary, and they go get to be a star.
Nice. Yeah. So, who was your first ever client?
I guess AJ would classify... well, no, that's not true. But the first guys I helped would be the guys we got started in Nashville. So the first guys I helped would have been Shannon Moore, Joey Matthews, Christian York, Shane Helms, Wolfie D, Flash Flanagan, Nicky Dinsmore, Rob Conway, who am I missing? The Balls, Reno, Steve Dunn, Reno Riggins, Dutch at some minor level. But, I mean, basically those are the guys I started helping at first that I was working with. In terms of actual development and getting them new jobs, probably the Bad Street, Wolfie Flash and the Bad Street Boys, and then Reno and those guys during that time as I was promoting in Georgia and bringing them in. But the Bad Street Boys are the ones we actually took from relatively nothing. They were doing Omega and came to do us, and then all of them got deals for a while or for a goodly while with WWE.
Okay. So
Christian's the only one that never got the spot full time. Joey ended up getting it. Shane Shannon got it. And by the way, they got hired by WCW because a video we had done in Nashville of those guys walking around with their shirts off, basically, was seen by Jimmy Hart, and they were doing a boy band thing without them singing because they couldn't sing.
yeah.
So, really. And then Jimmy saw it, and he went, what if I make them sing? And I like those two in particular, and then I'll put the underwear model with them. And then, so then that led to 3 Count.
Yeah. Okay, so who's your latest client you signed?
The people I'm working, well, some of them I've been with a while that I help a lot. Mike Posey, who was in WWE and is doing a P-Dog thing with a bunch of guys we call the Get Along Gang. I'm trying to help them get farther. I'm working with Peach State Wrestling in Georgia with their young talent. I'm now a heel manager there, so I'm enjoying myself. And then pretty much anybody who's new. I mean, I've been working with Moose off and on, which is its own unique challenge. And I still work with Matt Seidel. I still work with Chris Daniels, Frankie Kazarian. Full time on the regular with AJ, obviously on the regular.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's continuing. I spent a lot of time working with Ring of Honor on stuff, so I'm involved with their talent on a lot of bases. Young Bucks, I help when I can. They're doing pretty well on their own.
Yeah.
Ricochet is one of my people I'm helping.
Nice.
Galloway. So I have a lot of guys with various companies.
I heard you mention before.
And of course TNA hates me, so I don't talk to TNA much.
Yeah. I heard you mention earlier or in a different interview that ROH was the easiest to deal with.
ROH is a walk in the park because the blessing of them. Honestly, they're easier now than they were back when they were run by kids just putting on a show. Back when Gabe was booking and Sid was there and all the other guys. Even when Rob was back there, they were much more indie back then.
Mm-hmm.
Guys all doing too many jobs, doing them only the best they could, and everybody having to have a somewhat inflated ego. And and Ring of Honor now is progressing step by step toward being a real big boy business. Because Joe Koff, the guy that's heading it, who happens to be a wrestling fan, and he'll admit it, he marks out like anybody, but he's also a real businessman. He's an executive in the company who trains the sales executives at the stations on how to do their job. This is a real deal guy. Greg, who's the financial guy, is younger, but is learning on the job and doing a tremendous job. Kevin Kelly just moved into the office, and he has tons of experience at this point. Jeff Jones, who's been multitasking all over the place, is I think going to be doing even a better job going forward, and he's been involved for a while. So slowly but surely, the company is growing, and then Hunter Johnston, the booker, is a kid who used to drive all the way from St. Louis to work with me at Wildside. So he's one of my kids, and so we work a lot together, and AJ going there was very deliberately done. The tie-in to New Japan was very deliberately done. New Japan going into business with Ring of Honor was the inevitable result of that. And you can't look at Ring of Honor and New Japan working together and think anything's going wrongly. Now, with New Japan involved, Ring of Honor will also be working more on the regular with CMLL. So one of the two top companies in Mexico is already setting up to promote in the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, they're just an honest group of people. They're not, idiots. They're not, and they're not full of themselves. And some people in some companies are full of themselves. One of the great things that happened to Ring of Honor was Kerry Selkin was financing it. It was doing as well as it was, and when he sold it off, he was able to walk away and come back and still be recognized as the guy that contributed. The one thing that's probably going to hold TNA back inevitably is, will Dixie be willing to be that person too and allow her company to grow by allowing a different direction and allowing a different management team?
Mm-hmm.
Even if she has still an involvement. But the reality is, if your business is deteriorating and you're desperately trying to find money, and you're in charge, and you've been in charge during that whole process, and the decisions you made led to that, then inevitably you have to start going, hey, the best way for me to grow my company is to stay involved and take a step to the side and see if we can figure out another way to make this thing work.
Yeah. I think she's kind of leaning towards that with Billy Corgan now. I mean, I don't know his involvement.
No, I believe that Billy is doing the spot he's doing and simply allowed them to pay for the last taping, and hopefully this taping is going to have no issues. But everything's being done, unfortunately, bless their hearts, just so show to show.
Yeah.
I I congratulated a wrestler by sending him a note saying, "Congratulations on your new contract with TNA." And I said, "Now all you have to do is raise the money."
Yep.
And I'm hoping that's not true. I'm hoping they're going to do better. But
Right.
I'm not convinced of that, and my experiences working with them on contracts and with talent deals, all of which recently have fallen apart when I'm involved. But the reality is that the process ends up, in the things that are easy with WWE and easy with Ring of Honor, am I going to get my money? Questions inevitably become minor issues, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah, right now, were I ranking the companies based on the business that they have, WWE is number one and Ring of Honor is number two, and everybody else is trying to be number three, with TNA having the best potential, simply because they have an existing show and they have at least 300,000, 400,000 people watching. So
Yeah. It varies, I guess. I don't watch it personally, but so how do you get some of the names that you have signed underneath you? Because you ran off a couple of like who's who, like top guys right now. I mean, how do you get some of those names?
some I've worked with for a long time, so I've always helped them, and always in different deals. There's no template of a deal,
Mm-hmm.
and some are then recommended. I got Drew Galloway. I started helping because Matt Seidel asked me to. He said, "Can you call him? He would be somebody that needs help." So I did. Ricochet came through. I think Ricochet was through Matt too. Yep.
Nice.
And AJ sent me some people. Daniels has sent me some people. All the people I've worked with.
Yeah.
The only thing they all have to be aware of is that, unfortunately, I tell them the truth. So that's the only downside.
I don't know if you can answer this or not, or if you know the answer, but Ricochet didn't re-sign with Lucha Underground, and there was like a good amount of money on the table there. Do you know?
Honestly, don't know what Trevor's going to do. I do know that depending, he may or may not be available soon.
Mm-hmm.
For other things, I am aware, as there should be, that there's probable interest in him by other people. Probably half the free world. Right now, to the best of my knowledge, I believe he'll do what I think is the third cycle for Lucha Underground. I believe they've only done cycle 1 and cycle 2.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he'll do the third cycle. When that tapes, I don't know. And when that'll begin and end, I don't know. So that aspect of it will probably have to be resolved. Anything that could happen with WWE would obviously have to happen after any contract he has with Lucha Underground, because
Right.
they have exclusivities. With their exclusivities, however, though, he's still been able to do New Japan Pro Wrestling, so he'll continue to tour New Japan Pro Wrestling as he has been.
Yeah, and
I believe he's now a trios champion, if I remember correctly.
yeah. Was he in the PWG, the Bola coming up?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's another thing.
Yeah, he and Matt are both in that.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. I can't wait for that. How many clients do you currently represent?
I have no idea. It depends, because there's always just the young kids, but there's the big list. Anybody that wants to see the list of people I represent for whatever that value that has, just go to my website, www.sbibookings.com. S as in Sam, B boy, I idiot. Bookings at AOL.com, and there's a list to the left of all of the exciting people.
Is there like a cap on how many clients you could have, or you don't put a number on it?
It's up to me and the expectation of the people involved, and then the only question is, am I doing everything, or am I doing some things, and who else is involved? Because respectfully, there's a lot of people pretending to be agents, who are, to the best of my ability, more retarded than they are agents. Just literally the guys you'd see in the front row at a Nashville show are out representing people.
Yeah.
And and which is unfortunate and at some level tragic. But because sometimes they make wrestlers money, some wrestlers don't mind where the money comes from. And I think that's the downside of the agent business, is that sometimes what I'm doing as a business gets affected by what an idiot's doing for fun.
Yeah.
Simply so they might get to see their wrestler friend.
Yeah. Okay.
There's very few legitimate wrestlers. Honestly, other people may say they have the spot, but to the best of my knowledge, I'm really the only guy that's a wrestling agent in wrestling for real.
Yeah.
Like legitimate with a company and everything. That actually does this for a living.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anybody else doing that. There's other people representing talent as a full-time business, but no one that does it as a wrestling thing.
Well, I was gonna throw a name out there I had on the podcast before, Steve Stasiak. I don't know if you know the name.
I do, and I've worked with Steve to make sure that he doesn't promote that he's helping any of the people I represent.
Okay.
That's the best way to say it.
Okay, and another one, Sean Patrick Mullen.
No, the name, don't know him.
Okay.
By the way, I don't want to be disrespectful to either of them. If either of them can convince me they're doing this as the way they make a living,
Mm-hmm.
I would consider them to be part of a peer group, but I really can't.
Right. I gotcha. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I just can't. and I could go on with way too much bad information as to why that's true.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if something is done well and they happen to be involved and people end up happy at the other end of it, then I don't really care. It doesn't hurt me, as long as none of these guys attempt to suggest they're handling the people I do, unless I find out from those people they want that.
Right.
And then most of the time, if I will tell them if they do, then that's what they're doing. There can't be too many people going to independent promoters marketing the same people. And in fact, it's hard if there's more than one.
Mm-hmm.
Because invariably, somebody screws up.
Right. Okay, so I mean, obviously, like, it's not a one-man operation you're running. Like, you have a team behind you and stuff, right?
No, I multitask.
Right. Oh, okay. So it is all you.
No, because everything I do has to be based on what I do. I've had assistants. I've had people to help me off and on my whole career,
Mm-hmm.
and thank God for those people. But inevitably, there's people that have done really great support work for me, and it helped out tremendously. But in terms of getting the deals and dealing with most of the stuff, unfortunately, I have to do most of it, if not all of it.
Okay. Was there something I saw on the website with Scott Steiner? He was with you, and then he wasn't.
Scotty had been helping for a while. We've had some communication issues on something and another minor issue, and I just decided it would be better for me to not represent him, because if I can't hear from him, I can't represent him.
Right.
So, he's taking this up. He opened up a restaurant in Georgia. He's taking stuff. I haven't heard from him. He literally has not communicated with me, and I have no idea why. But regardless, I've always liked Scott and did a lot with Scott, and Scott was always good business for me. So I have no problem.
All right. Have you almost had a client, but for whatever reason it didn't work out?
I've had several clients that have not worked out and who I won't do business with again, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay. Is there any current free agents out there that you like want to sign, or are you looking at?
Dumb as it is, I don't really look for people. I mean, there's some I communicated with Will Ospreay at one point over something that Vader and he were trying to do. And, if he ever wanted me to help him, I would. But this time he's doing just fine, so I don't think he needs my help.
Yeah.
If he did, he'd be the kind of person I'd be interested in helping. I'm not really interested in taking on the career of an aging veteran.
I gotcha.
But he'd be an example of somebody like Ricochet was.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to deal with somebody with that talent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Bill, we're kind of winding down here. We're at almost an hour and a half.
Okay.
I
Well,
wanna,
then I'm fine.
yeah. I want to thank you. Appreciate your time, and this was really easy. You made it really easy, like I thought you would.
Well, good. I'm glad it went well, or might go well. If there's a link that this actually gets posted at, I'd be pleased to know.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you if you want to throw out your social media stuff and all that.
Yeah, let's see. I'm William Behrens, or at William Behrens on Twitter. I'm William Behrens on Facebook, and www.sbibookings.com. There's also an old tribute site to NWA Wildside that's still up with TV shows on it if people want to see that.
Nice.
NWAWildside.com.
Check that out.
So,
Yeah. All right.
and if you really get bored, you can Google my name. And if you get, as long as you stay with wrestling-related stuff, you're fine. Otherwise, I think the other guy that gets the most hits is a preacher.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
That was not me.
Yeah, it took me to a different Wikipedia page, and I was like, wait a minute, 46. No offense,
That's
but but yeah.
I'm pushing 60. So,
Yeah, yeah. But when I was doing my research on you, like you were by far the easiest person I've ever researched because everything came up real quick, like you said, and I was like, wow, it writes itself. I don't have to write anything down really, and you carried the interview great. So I
to the
mean,
extent your life can be fulfilled by reading your own Google stuff, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm doing fine. I'm relatively good. I've got a lot of Google. So
Yeah.
that's good.
All right, Bill. Before we
Thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. All right, that was my conversation with Bill Behrens. Told you guys that was going to be a good one, behind the scenes, a history lesson of all the earlier promotions and just what goes into the TV side of it and that aspect. I really enjoyed that one. I hope you guys did too. I'm gonna go check out NWA Wildside right now and spend the rest of my day doing that because he said that stuff's available. So in the meantime, get out of here on my plugs. Facebook group page, Electric City Wrestling Fans, at Twitter, at ECWF Podcast, on YouTube, Electric City Wrestling Fans, Facebook page, Electric City Wrestling Fans, iTunes, Electric City Wrestling Fans. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube, subscribe to iTunes, follow on Twitter, like on Facebook, and that's it for now. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.
For heaven's sake, no one's looking out just to make a